Coming up on our broadcast, President Park's approval ratings took a plunge after last month's ferry disaster, but latest polling showed that number may be on the rebound. We'll take a look at how that will impact the upcoming local elections. North Korea will compete in the 2014 Asian Games to be held in South Korea later this year. And the latest development in Thailand, former Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has reported to the military junta that took control of the politically unstable country in a coup a day earlier. Early edition begins now. It is 5 a.m. in New York, 4 p.m. in Bangkok, and 6 p.m. on Friday, the 23rd of May here in Seoul. This is Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Geunhye.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us. President Park Geunhye held a meeting with her security-related ministers earlier today, following North Korea's shelling across the western maritime border the night before.
Where she expressed deep regret over Pyongyang's latest provocation, as South Korea is still mourning the loss of hundreds of lives from last month's ferry disaster. The president called on the military and related agencies to stay focused on protecting the safety of South Koreans living on the western seaboard islands. She also discussed bolstering Seoul's defense readiness with Washington and cooperating with neighboring countries like China on handling North Korea-related issues.
The meeting comes a day after the president accepted the resignations of her top security advisor and intelligence agency chief following her pledge for sweeping government reforms.
Zero tolerance for North Korea's provocations. Well, that's one commitment reaffirmed by South Korea and the European Union as they vow to jointly counter any provocations by the North amid threats of a fourth nuclear test.
Following talks in Seoul on this Friday, South Korean Foreign Minister Geunhye and EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton made it clear that the North's nuclear development will not be condoned. Minister Yoon said the international community will respond in a resolute manner to any additional provocations by the North, including a nuclear test. While Ashton said the EU shares the same objectives as the South of a nuclear-free North Korea in a stable and peaceful Korean peninsula. North Korea continues its diplomatic activities with the outside world, meeting this week with senior figures from the U.S. and Mongolia and Japanese officials next week.
Well, that's according to South Korean media reports citing an unnamed diplomatic source with knowledge of the matter. Now, experts say it indicates Pyongyang is open for talks, but another provocation aimed at the South is sending out mixed signals. Our UDN reports.
Senior figures from North Korea and the United States have been holding talks this week for the first time since the purge and execution of Pyongyang's second most powerful figure, Jang Song-taek, late last year. A delegation of North Korean officials headed by Vice Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho was scheduled to hold a meeting with Stephen Bosworth, the former U.S. Special Representative for North Korea policy, along with other North Korean experts in Mongolia on Friday. The meeting is part of a series of so-called 1.5-track meetings that began last September when the two groups met for the first time in Berlin.
With North Korean nuclear problem still unresolved, it's significant that the countries are holding talks through the 1.5-track meetings, where the two can narrow down their differences.
North Korea also has talks with Japan slated for this coming Monday, where diplomats from the two countries will discuss Pyongyang's past abductions of Japanese citizens and its nuclear program. But despite the diplomatic activity, North Korea continues its provocative actions. It fired artillery in the direction of a South Korean warship near the de facto maritime border, separating the two Koreas on Thursday.
So overall, they're trying to mix up with the diplomatic maneuvers, with the provocative actions within Korean Peninsula. The thing is, we international community have not seen the North Korean behavior that offers a pathway to negotiating settlement.
At this rate, North Korea is unlikely to find a breakthrough in its efforts to engage itself with the outside world anytime soon. Yurian, Arirang News.
When the 17th Asian Games kick off in the South Korean city of Incheon this coming September, North Korean athletes will be there competing for medals.
North Korean state media made the announcement Friday upon a decision by the North's Olympic Committee, which added they were taking all the steps necessary to participate. The South Korean government had said earlier this year that North Korean athletes were welcome at the Games. They run from September 19th through October 4th. And this will be Pyongyang's fourth straight appearance since 2002 Asian Games in Busan. May 24th, 2010, South Korea slapped a handful of economic sanctions on North Korea for its torpedo attack on a South Korean warship that killed 46 South Korean sailors.
Now, 4 years later, the sanctions remain in place, but some say they should be lifted for the sake of improving inter-Korean relations. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sang-hee joins us live to paint us a clearer picture. Now, Sang-hee, let's start with the sanctions themselves.
Well, Geunhye, the so-called May 24th sanctions cut off all government-led financial support for North Korea, suspended inter-Korean projects, and banned new investments in the north except for their jointly run Kaesong industrial complex. Now, this in response to North Korea's sinking of the South Korean warship Cheonan. But as you said, Geunhye, many North Korea experts are now calling for the sanctions to be lifted. A recent survey of North Korea experts shows that 9 out of 10 respondents said the sanctions should be either lifted or eased to expand inter-Korean economic ties and ease tensions on the peninsula.
And Sang-hee, also the sanctions have had a significant effect on economic cooperation between the two Koreas.
That's right. Inter-Korean economic cooperation tumbled after the 2010 sanctions were put in place. At one point, trade volume between the two Koreas stood at nearly $3 billion, but this has dropped to around $1 to $2 billion. This, of course, is because the only inter-Korean economic project today is the Kaesong industrial complex. Experts say the sanctions have caused more damage to South Korea than North Korea.
South Korean small and medium-sized companies and conglomerates that invest in North Korea are now seeing economic losses from the May 24th sanctions. In contrast, North Korea has expanded trade with its allies like China and Russia, which have helped to minimize its losses from the sanctions.
And in fact, data released by the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency yesterday shows that North Korea's trade volume jumped nearly 8% last year from the year earlier to over $7 billion. Trade with China made up around 90% of that total as Pyongyang's economic dependence on Beijing continues to grow.
Right, Sang-hee, and we know that President Park Geun-hye has been placing much emphasis on the need for a Korean reunification. Now, would you say lifting these sanctions factor in with that vision?
Well, that's right. They're not only getting in the way of realizing a handful of inter-Korean projects put forth by President Park, but also efforts to prepare for a reunified Korea. The Gyeoramal Kunsajan Committee started out in 2005 with an ambitious goal of narrowing the language gap between the two Koreas by creating a joint dictionary. It's an important project, considering that the average South Korean only understands roughly 50% of the North Korean dialect and vice versa. Divided into two teams, South Korean and North Korean, they had been meeting about 4 times a year to work on the dictionary. But the project has been at a standstill for 4 years now, when the May 24th sanctions were put in place.
We haven't been able to hold meetings with the North Korean committee since 2010. The South Korean committee has finished our portion of the work over the 4 years, but we must receive the North Korean portion, which will make up about half of the dictionary.
Experts say lifting of the sanctions will serve as the first vital step towards bringing the two Koreas together. This, as most of President Park Geun-hye's inter-Korean project proposals, such as the Eurasia Initiative, a construction of railways running from South Korea to Europe via North Korea, Russia, and China, demand fresh investments in the north. But will the sanctions be lifted once and for all?
Rather than an immediate lifting of the May 24th sanctions, South Korea could become more flexible with the measures following its local elections on June 4th, and as positive changes are seen in inter-Korean relations and North Korea's nuclear program.
Well, the South Korean government, however, stresses that the May 24th sanctions will remain in place until North Korea takes responsibility for its attack on the South Korean warship Cheonan 4 years ago.
Well, they were there for a good reason before, and we'll have to think hard and long about what should be done in the future. Thank you for that report, Seung-hee.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Geunhye and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Come June 4th, the Korean public is widely expected to send a strong message to the government and the ruling party over their poor handling of last month's deadly ferry disaster. Well, polls showed a sharp drop in support for the ruling Saenuri party immediately after the accident, but that number has been picking up, suggesting President Park Geun-hye's apology and a shakeup of her top advisors in recent days may have given the ruling party a boost. Our Park Ji-won reports.
The failed handling of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster has hit the incumbent administration hard. Since the accident in mid-April, President Park Geun-hye's approval rating had been on a steady decline, dropping to 51% in the second week of May, according to public opinion research firm Realmeter. But the president's apology to the nation this week may have turned the tide. Media research has Park's approval rating rebounding to the 60% range for the first time since the ferry disaster, up to 62%. Research View also says President Park's public address on Monday pushed up her positive ratings by 4 percentage points this week compared to the previous one. Both polls surveyed some 1,000 people nationwide over the age of 19. Political analysts say her appointing of reform-minded former Supreme Court Justice An Dae-hee as new prime minister and accepting the resignations of her top security advisors could also play a role in gathering conservative support at the elections.
Due to prevailing negative views about the ruling party following its poor handling of the disaster, conservative-inclined voters weren't able to outwardly express their support for the ruling party. The president's call for changes means the ability to support conservative candidates has been restored to some degree.
However, in a survey conducted by Research and Research, 40% of respondents said the ferry disaster affected their voting decisions, and nearly 60% of them said their support has shifted to opposition parties. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Well, it's day 2 on the campaign trail for candidates vying for seats in the June 4th local elections. With just 13 days in total to shake hands and drum up the support, they surely aren't wasting any time. Arirang's Geunhye brings us the campaign scenes from 2 of the most hotly contested regions.
The metropolitan cities of Seoul and Incheon, along with Gyeonggi-do province, are shaking out to be the fiercest battlegrounds in this local election. Senior member of the ruling Saenuri party plan to join the campaign trail next week to throw their weight behind their mayoral hopefuls in Seoul and Incheon. They need all the help they can get. Ruling party candidate for Seoul Mayor Chung Mong-jun, who is trailing by 15 points in the polls behind incumbent Park Won-soon, handed out food to elderly citizens at a welfare center while Park had lunch with college students. Over in the western port city of Incheon, the ruling party's mayoral candidate Yoo Jung-bok is also behind in the polls by more than 10 percentage points. He and his challenger in the race, incumbent Song Young-gil, visited elderly community centers. And in Gyeonggi-do province, where the race for governor is much tighter, the main opposition candidate Kim Jin-pyo of the New Politics Alliance for Democracy was joined on the campaign trail by co-chairman of the party, An Chol-soo. The ruling party's Nam Kyung-pil, who is in a neck-and-neck race with Kim, shook hands with the elderly at a welfare center in the city of Seongnam. And Cheolsu's presence in Geunhye was for a reason, as a win by the NPAD there would constitute a major win, as the province has a greater population than Seoul. The main opposition alliance is trying to appeal to undecided voters who may be disappointed by the government's poor handling of April's ferry disaster. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Well, criticism over the government's handling of the ferry disaster has also prompted lawmakers to take a long, hard look at a bill that would redefine what constitutes corruption among public officials. The legislation had been the subject of a fierce debate for years, but as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, last month's ferry tragedy has given it a momentum.
An anti-corruption bill in Korea is gaining traction on public outrage over the Seoul ferry tragedy. Lawmakers will likely vote on the Kim Young-lan bill, which is aimed at raising the bar of ethical practices for public officials. The bill is named after former Supreme Court Justice Kim Young-lan, who first proposed it during her term as chief of the Anticorruption and Civil Rights Commission of Korea. The bill sets grounds to criminally punish retired and incumbent public officials for colluding with interest groups. Bribery is defined in the legislation as a transfer of money or valuables worth more than 1 million Korean won, or about $976 between a public official and interest group, even if the deal is not followed by a favor. Lawmakers have been divided over the bill. Some have stood firmly against it since it was first proposed in 2012, claiming the bill would unnecessarily restrict the private lives of public servants. But there's been a shift after the ferry accident as public calls have grown louder about reforms to ensure that similar tragedies don't occur. The Kim Young-lan bill has been forwarded to the Parliament's National Policy Committee for approval. If it passes there, it will be sent to a full session of the National Assembly, which could pass it as early as Monday. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The National Assembly has a new speaker. Five-term lawmaker Geunhye of the ruling Assembly Party was elected to post this Friday during a general meeting of the party's assembly members. He places outgoing Speaker Kang Chang-hee, whose term ended yesterday. Jung is a member of the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee and represents 2 districts in the southern port city of Busan. He will lead the legislative body for 2 years. Moving on to the latest on the investigation into the Seoul ferry disaster, authorities now consider the de facto owner of the ferry Yoo Byung-eun a fugitive after he failed to show up for questioning multiple times. Investigators believe Yoo, who is also leader of a religious cult, is hiding out in a devotee's home. Prosecutors say a number of residences are now under 24-hour surveillance. They are warning that anyone found helping the ferry owner to hide will also be punished. This comes a day after prosecutors were granted a warrant to detain Yoo. Prosecutors have also offered a cash reward of 50 million won, or about $48,000 to anyone with information on his whereabouts. A cash reward has also been offered for information on his eldest son, Yoo Dae-kyun, who is on the nation's most wanted list. Shifting our focus to other parts of our world, one day after the Thai military announced it was staging a coup d'etat, they called in ousted Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra for questioning, along with dozens of others. Here's our Kwon So-wa with more.
Thailand's ousted Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra and more than 100 other political figures made an appearance for questioning at a military facility in Bangkok Friday on the army's request. There was no immediate word on what Yingluck or the others were asked about. It comes after the Thai military suspended most of the constitution and imposed a travel ban on 155 politicians after announcing a military coup d'etat on Thursday. They say the goal is to end the ongoing political turmoil in the country, but world leaders have been quick to condemn the move. It came just 2 days after the army's sudden declaration of martial law Tuesday, plus their earlier denial of a possible coup. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said there was no justification for the coup and warned of negative consequences.
At this point, what we're doing is we are reviewing our military and other assistance to the government of Thailand. We've taken preliminary steps to suspend military engagement and assistance while we consider the facts on the ground.
United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon voiced deep concern over the threat to the human rights of the Thai people and appealed for a prompt return to constitutional and democratic rule, as well as all-inclusive dialogue. The so far bloodless coup includes a nationwide curfew of 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., and soldiers have dispersed demonstrators at two main protest sites. Government programming is filling the airwaves and international news channels are blocked. Korea's foreign ministry raised its level 1 travel advisory that was in effect for much of Thailand to a level 2 on Friday, meaning travelers should take caution when traveling to or within the country. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Japan has once again been called out for ignoring its past wrongdoings, this time by a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Loretta Sanchez didn't just aim her latest comments at Tokyo, but also called on her colleagues in the Senate to take action and make sure the former comfort women receive justice. Our Connie Kim has this report.
A U.S. Congresswoman in the Armed Services Committee has called on Japan to officially apologize for its sexual enslavement of women during World War II. Loretta Sanchez, co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Korea, said in a meeting that Japan had still not apologized to the victims it caused to suffer more than 70 years and that their human rights need to be upheld. Urging her fellow congressmen to support the surviving comfort women, Sanchez called on the Japanese government to uphold a U.S. resolution passed in 2007 that calls on Tokyo to formally acknowledge, apologize, and accept its historical responsibility for enslaving women during World War II and educate future generations of the horrific crimes that were carried out. Sanchez said earlier this month in a military plenary session that Japan's comfort women issue cannot be dealt separately in the Obama administration's Asia rebalancing strategy. She warned that Japan needed to resolve its long-standing disputes in the region first. Experts say, however, Washington is taking a two-track approach towards Japan.
The U.S. welcomes Japan's push to restore its right to collective self-defense, but at the same time condemns Japan's historical wrongdoings. We can't say whether Washington values human rights issues more than they do security.
Lee added that Washington can always change its stance on the comfort women issue depending on its political interests in East Asia. Currently, less than 100 women of the 200,000 so-called comfort women are alive today. Meanwhile, a Japanese policy research center published a book in English recently that denies the past enforcement of sexual slavery. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Well, another warm day here in the nation's capital, but for more on the forecast, let's go over to our Michelle Park. Now, Michelle, today felt even hotter here in the capital compared to yesterday.
That's right. The daytime highs rose to 5 degrees higher than the average seasonal temperatures.
Does that mean we'll be pumping up the air conditioner and we'll be paying higher electricity bills this summer?
Not exactly, because the high pressure trough coming from the North Pacific, which usually causes a scorching hot weather, isn't going to extend this year. And once again, tomorrow we are expecting a hot day with partly cloudy skies across the nation. And however, the UV levels are expected to be high. Now, although our Saturday looks gorgeous, the weather will turn its course by bringing us some rain on Sunday in the central region during the afternoon and over the whole nation by the evening, which will also drop our highs. Now going over to our temperature readings, we'll start off the morning at 17 before going up to 29 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 32 and 25 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 25, Dokdo at 27, while Mangungang tops out at 23. Now, as for the weather conditions down in Jindo at the site of the ferry disaster, the winds and tides are pretty calm, and however, we are expecting some thunderstorm tomorrow. Now, that's all I have at this moment. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Geunhye, and to those of you in other parts of the world, have a great start to your day, and to all of you, have a great weekend, and we hope to see you right back here, same time, Monday evening. Bye-bye.